Maimers and Shabbos part Tevis Tavshel Lamed Gimel. Vayhi Mikesh Nasayim Yomim. It was at the end of 2 years' days. Beginning of the parsha, Pari Cholim and Pari dreamed. Vihina Oimid Ayor. Behold, he is standing upon the river the Nile. Yedu Habir Gifas. That's known. The question about this. It's Tzarich Lahavin Klal Se'inyan Mashagulas Yosef. Hoisa De Cholim Daf. We need to understand the general idea of why the redemption of Yosef was specifically took place through a dream. Through Pari dreamt, that's how his redemption was. When Pari dreamed, he didn't know the meaning of his dream. So then the Saramashkim reminded Pari about Yosef. Yosef came out, told him the meaning of his dream, and that's how Yosef got out of prison. So what's the connection between Yosef's redemption being linked to the dreams? On the dreams of Pari. Another question is, what's the connection also between Pari's dreaming and the end of 2 years? The Koya Machkasa Parsha Shalifin is that it's referring to the end of 2 years of what happened earlier. Which 2 years did it end? There was an event at the end of the previous Parsha. The end of the previous Parsha, there was a story with the Sarah Mashkim, the Sarah Oifim. They had a dream. Yosef interpreted the dreams for them. And from that story, at the end of 2 years since that story, that's when Pari dreamed. Like it's explained in the Alter Rebbe's Mamorim, and the Mittler Rebbe's Mamorim, and the Mamorim following the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, that this Parsha is connected to the previous Parsha. Since it concluded the previous parsha about what happened with the dreams of the Sarah Mashkim and the Sarah Oifim. So 2 years later, after that whole story with Yosef interpreting their dreams, that's when Pari dreamed. Shesham Namar over there, at the end of the previous parsha, it says that the butler, the Sarah Mashkim, did not remember Yosef and he forgot him. Why did he forget him? Because since Yosef depended upon the Saramashkim to remember him, like it says also at the end of last parsha, that when I will be remembered with you, and you shall remember me to Pari. In other words, when you get out of prison and they release you, make sure to tell them that there is this Hebrew lad that's over here suffering for no reason. So Yosef's reliance on the Sarah Mashkin was the opposite of what it says in the pasuk. Fortunate is a man that places his trust in Hashem. He does not turn to the haughty ones, to the arrogant ones. And the Chazal say about that, and he does not place his trust on the Egyptians that are called Rahab. So that's what it means that he didn't rely on the Egyptians. But Yosef did rely on the Egyptian. He did rely on the Sarah Mashkim and so on. Because he relied and he did not follow what it says in this pasuk, therefore he is punished. Therefore he had to be imprisoned another 2 years. And the Rebbe says, what does it mean another 2 years? Really, Yosef HaTzadik was only meant to be imprisoned for 10 years. But at the end of the 10 years, when it happened, the story with the Sarah Mashkim, the Sarah Oifim, and he relied on them, and he asked them to mention them to Paroi, so then he got an extension of his prison term, and he was punished by having to sit another 2 years in prison. So the Rebbe asks as follows. So this is all to explain how Vayhi Mikesh Nasayim Shana is a continuation of the previous parsha. That at the end of 2 years of the whole events that happened at the end over there with Yosef and the Sarah Mashkim and so on, 2 years later, Pari dreamt and etc. So the Rebbe says in line 18, seemingly in the Shnasayim Yamim Ayitzarech Li, so Parsha Kedem is the idea of the 2 years should have been in the previous Parsha. And this parsha should have begun with the with the dream of Pari. In other words, the previous parsha should have ended with the imprisonment of Yosef, how long he's there in prison. And it could have just said, and Zochar, Sarah Mashkim as Yosef Ishkachehu, and the butler did not remember Yosef and he forgot him, and he remained there in prison for another 2 years. Then our parsha should have begun with the idea of Pari dreamt a dream. Why does he start talking about 2 years since what happened over there with the Sarah Mashkin? He should have said that in the previous parsha. Another question on line 20, also when you understand much. Because of Vayhi Mikation Osayim Yom, what it's written, that was at the end of 2 years. The Lechura Habalei Meimar Vayhi Mikate Shtemes Rishon. Seemingly, it should have said it occurred at the end of 12 years. Shizel Kol Meshach Azman Shaya Asur Bebeis Hasurim. This is the entire time that Yosef was imprisoned in prison. He was a total of 12 years, like we mentioned before. He was supposed to be 10 years in prison, and another 2 years was extended, and that was supposed to be the time that he should have, and that was the ultimate time how much he spent in prison was 12 years. So he says on the top of page Vav, when he was sold, he was 17 years old. When he went out of imprisonment, he was 30 years old. In the meantime, he was imprisoned 12 years. Obviously, he wasn't imprisoned exactly on his birthday when he turned 17, and he didn't come out of imprisonment exactly when he was 30 years old on his birthday, because then it would have been at least 13 years in prison. But he was 17 years old and he was 30 years old. So there was he was 12 years in prison. So either the parsha could have just said, it was at the end of 12 years of Yosef's imprisonment. Or if he doesn't want to get into the years, so he could have said line 4, he could have just said a more general term without getting into the details. And it was at the end of Yosef sitting in prison, or some other expression like that. Why is it necessary to point out 2 years? Why does he say at the end of 2 years? From this, it's indicated that the idea that Pari dreamt kosher is connected not with the first 10 years that Yosef was imprisoned. Was specifically connected with the 2 years. So this is what the Rebbe is deriving from this. The fact that our parsha is beginning with Vayhi Miketz Nasayim Shana, there is some specific connection between Pari's dreams and the 2 years. It doesn't have to do with the 12 years. It doesn't have to do with the amount of time that Yosef sat in total in prison. It's something about these 2 years that following that, in connection with that, that is what we have Pari's dream. And obviously the Maimon is going to analyze what that is. Also, another question that I've asked on line 9, Gamtar Lav, and also when you'd understand. The exact expression that he uses the term Shnasayim in one word. Similarly, he should have said with 2 words, 2 years, instead of Shnasayim, which is one word that means 2 years. He could have just as easily said Shtei Shonim. Obviously, both of them are correct, but the fact that he chose to use one over the other, and the one is not as common as we find in other places, so there must be a reason for specifically using the word for 2 years that combines it in one word. Another question that I've asked on line 11, Gamtzar Lahav, and also we need to understand, Mashal Achre Tevis Shnasayim, Moisiv Gam Tevis Yom. Also, why does he add after the word Shnasayim the words Yomim? It could have said, Vayhi Miketz Shnasayim Upari Cholim Cholim. It was at the end of 2 years, and Pari dreamed. Why does it say Vayhi Miketz Shnasayim Yomim? 2 years of days, or 2 years of Yomim can also mean a year, but what does he gain? What does he need to add the word Yomim for? And then he says, another question, line 12, Gamtzar Lav. Also, when you understand Mashakos, Pari Choylem, what it says in Pari dreamed, Vihine Oimid Al Hayoir. Behold, he is standing upon the Nile, the river. And not near the river, or something similar, a similar expression to that, it could have said. Especially according to what's explained in the Medrash. Move of Pirish Rashi, Alat Pasuk, and is brought down in Rashi's explanation on the Pasuk. What was this river that Pari was standing by? That's the Nile. It was rising, and it would irrigate the entire land of Mitzrayim. Was supplied with water because it was very dry and it wasn't didn't have much rainfall. So did they irrigate the land? That was through the Nile, would rise up and fill these type of like troughs and so on that used to irrigate the entire Mitzrayim. The Fishain Sham Yard in Mitzrayim, because rain does not come down in Egypt. The Nile would give life, vitality, sustenance to the Egyptians. To such a degree that the Nile was looked at as such a giver of life that they worshipped it. They served it as an avodah zarah. If so, it's even more of a question, this expression, surely doesn't make sense to say in Pari standing on the Yair, because this is not his to give. He is not the one that gives it and causes the Yair to do anything. Even though Pari did take the credit for himself, and he said, the Nile is mine, and I made myself. He proclaimed himself a god that controls the Nile. The Hainish Pari must be Al Haya'ir. He believed that he was the one that gives to the Ya'ir, to the Nile. And he, therefore, is Al Haya'ir. He's upon it. The truth is not that way. Pari was only saying this, but it's not the truth. So why would it say that he was upon the Yair? And since we're talking about over here, a dream that he was shown from above. In other words, Hashem showed him this dream. If Hashem showed him this dream, he shouldn't be, like playing into his ego games. Why does it say that Pari was standing upon the Nile? When, in truth, he is not the one that is being mashpia to the Yair. He is the one that's actually the receiver, and he's getting his life like all the other Egyptians from the Nile. So therefore, when they're showing the dream to him, they shouldn't be showing him upon al, but they should be showing him only Eitzel. So that's the last question that ever asks, is why does it say Pari Oimid Al Yair, which seems to indicate that Pari is higher than the Yair, higher than the Nile.